Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rated from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The wind howled like a beast in pain as Cormac Quelling battled to secure his Longhouse door against the growing blizzard. Winter had arrived early in the northern reaches of Northumbria, a land still fresh with Saxon blood. Though 5 years had passed since the great heathen army had swept through these lands, tensions remained knife-edge sharp between conqueror and conquered. Cormac yanked the heavy wooden beam across the door just as another violent gust threatened to tear it from its hinges. Outside, snow was piling rapidly against the walls of his isolated homestead, built on the outer reaches of the settlement at Jorvik. Most of his fellow Norse warriors preferred the growing comforts of the trading center that had once been the Saxon city of Eoforwick, but Cormac sought solitude after years of raiding. At 30 winters, he had seen enough bloodshed to fill 10 lifetimes. His broad shoulders and scarred face told the tale of countless battles, from the shores of Ireland to the walls of Paris. The silver Thor's hammer that hung from his neck had tasted the spray of the sea and the mist of battle. Yet now, as the sole occupant of this sturdy longhouse on the windswept moor, he found a strange peace in the howling silence of the storm. He stoked the central hearth, adding another log to the hungry flames. Tonight would be bitter cold, the kind that froze men in their sleep if they weren't careful. Odin's breath, the elders called such weather. A test of endurance. The sound came so faintly that at first, Cormac thought it merely the wind's trickery. But then it came again, a scratching at the door, too deliberate to be merely branches or debris. He reached for his seeks, the fighting knife never far from his side, and approached the entrance cautiously. "Who disturbs my peace?" he called in the Norse tongue, his voice carrying the hard edge of a man who had killed for less provocation. No answer came, only another weak scratch against the wood. Cursing under his breath, Cormac slid the beam aside and cracked open the door. The force of the wind immediately caught it, pushing it wider than he intended, allowing a swirl of snow and ice to invade his warm sanctuary. And there, collapsing forward across his threshold, came a bundle of rags that barely resembled a human form. Cormac caught the figure before it struck the ground, surprised by how little it weighed. As he dragged it inside and kicked the door shut behind him, the bundle moved weakly in his arms. He carried it to the hearth and laid it gently on the fur-covered bench nearest the fire. As he peeled back the frozen, snow-encrusted cloak, he discovered not one person, but 4. A woman, her face white with cold except for the blue tinge of her lips, clutched 3 small children to her breast. The oldest couldn't have seen more than 6 winters, the youngest barely 1. "By Thor's beard," Cormac muttered, recognizing immediately the rough homespun garments of Saxons. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer meadows. Fear registered immediately in those eyes as she beheld the massive Norse warrior looming over her. "Please," she whispered in the Saxon tongue. "My children." Cormac's knowledge of the local language was rudimentary at best, learned mostly to barter and command, not to comfort. But he understood her plea well enough. "You are safe from the storm," he answered in her language, the words awkward on his tongue. "But perhaps not from me," he added in Norse, knowing she wouldn't understand. The woman tried to sit up, instinctively pulling her children closer. The oldest, a boy with hair the color of wheat, stared at Cormac with undisguised terror. The middle child, a girl of perhaps 4 winters, was barely conscious, her skin alarmingly pale. The baby made no sound at all. "The little ones first," Cormac said, reaching for the infant. The woman recoiled, her arms tightening around her children. "I will not harm them," he said slowly, deliberately in her tongue. "They will die without warmth. Understand?" After a moment's hesitation, her grip loosened, allowing him to take the baby. The child was cold to the touch, its tiny fingers and lips blue with frost. Cormac quickly wrapped the infant in a thick bearskin and placed it close to the fire, but not so near as to shock its system with sudden heat. "Your other children," he gestured. The woman nodded weakly, allowing him to take the semi-conscious girl. He did the same for her, wrapping her in furs and placing her beside her sibling. The boy refused to leave his mother's side. "Your name?" Cormac asked, as he fetched a horn of mead. Meredith, she whispered. Meredith Godwin. Drink, he commanded, holding the horn to her lips. She hesitated, then sipped the sweet liquid, coughing as its warmth spread through her chest. Where is your husband? Cormac asked, though he suspected the answer. Few Saxon men survived these days unless they swore fealty to their Norse conquerors. Dead, she said flatly. 2 winters passed. Fever. Not a battlefield death, then. Somehow that made it worse. A warrior's death Cormac could understand. Honor in battle was the way of his people. But to be felled by invisible enemies like sickness, it seemed a cruel joke of the gods. Why are you alone in such weather? He asked, checking on the infant, whose color was slowly improving. Our home. Meredith struggled to find the words in his language. Burned. Men came. We hid in the forest 3 days. Men? Norse men? Cormac asked, his jaw tightening. Meredith nodded slightly. They took everything. We walked, seeking shelter. Cormac cursed silently. Though King Guthrum had established relative peace in these lands, there were always those who ignored the agreements, raiding Saxon homesteads for sport and plunder. You should sleep, he said, placing another fur over her shivering form. Your children will live. The boy, still watching Cormac with suspicious eyes, finally spoke. Are you going to kill us when we're warm? Cormac was taken aback by the directness of the question. He looked at the child, seeing reflected in those young eyes all the horrors his people had inflicted on the Saxons. No, he said simply. Not tonight. The boy's eyes widened, but he said nothing more, instead curling closer to his mother, who had already drifted into exhausted sleep. Cormac sat back on his heels, studying the unexpected guests who had disrupted his solitude. By all rights, he should turn them out once the storm passed. They were Saxons, the enemy his people had conquered. At the very least, he should deliver them to the settlement, where they would likely become thralls, servants or slaves to Norse households. Yet something about the quiet dignity of the woman, the fierce protectiveness of the boy, and the innocent vulnerability of the younger children stirred something long dormant in Cormac's battle-hardened heart. He moved to the far corner of the Longhouse, where he kept his sleeping furs, leaving the warmer area near the hearth for his unexpected guests. As he stretched out his large frame, he found himself wondering what fate had brought these Saxons to his door on this, of all nights, the eve of Yule, when the barrier between worlds was said to be thinnest. Perhaps the gods were playing their tricks again. Or perhaps they were sending him a message. Morning brought clarity to the Longhouse as sunlight filtered through the smoke hole in the roof. Cormac had risen before dawn, as was his habit, and had already tended to his livestock in the adjoining shelter. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow, pristine and silent except for the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. He returned to find Meredith awake, nursing the infant, while her other children still slept. In the daylight, he could better assess her. Though thin from hardship, her face bore the kind of beauty that was not immediately obvious, a strength in her jaw, intelligence in her eyes, and a certain grace in how she held herself despite her circumstances. Her hair, now dried from the snow, was the color of autumn leaves, with streaks of gold where the sun caught it. They will recover, she said softly, nodding toward her older children. Thanks to your mercy. Cormac grunted, uncomfortable with gratitude. The storm has passed. What will you do now? The question hung between them. Meredith looked down at her baby, then at her sleeping children. There is nowhere to go, she admitted. Our village, many died when your people came. Those who survived scattered. My husband's brother took us in, but now his home is gone too. There are settlements where Saxons live under Norse protection. Cormac offered. As slaves, she said, a flash of defiance in her eyes. As thralls, he corrected, though the distinction was often meaningless. Some earn their freedom. Meredith said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Better to die free than live enslaved, he could read it in the set of her jaw. You have skills? He asked. I can weave, sew, cook, tend animals, brew ale, preserve meat, grow crops. She listed pragmatically. My husband was a freeman with his own land. I worked alongside him. Cormac nodded, impressed despite himself. She was no nobleman's pampered wife, but a woman of substance who knew the value of hard work. Stay, he said abruptly. Until you find somewhere better. Surprise flickered across her face. Why would you offer this? It was a fair question, one Cormac himself wasn't entirely sure how to answer. He shrugged his massive shoulders. Winter is harsh. The children would not survive another night like the last. It was practical, reasonable, and not entirely honest. Something deeper had prompted his offer, something he wasn't ready to examine. And what would you expect in return? Meredith asked carefully, her meaning clear. Cormac's expression darkened. I am no ravager of women. You will cook, help tend the animals, keep the house. Nothing more. Relief softened her features momentarily before wariness returned. Your people will not approve. This is my house. My land. I answer to no one but my Jarl, and he concerns himself little with what happens beyond the settlement walls. The boy had awakened during their conversation and now sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mother? He questioned, immediately alert to the tension between the adults. It's all right, Edwin. She soothed. This man. She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. Cormac. He supplied. Cormac has offered us shelter for a while. Edwin's eyes narrowed with suspicion beyond his years. He's a Northman. Father said never trust a Northman. Your father was wise, Cormac said, surprising them both. But sometimes survival requires difficult choices. The next days established an uneasy rhythm in the Longhouse. Cormac continued his daily routines, tending the small herd of sheep and goats, checking his fishing nets in the partially frozen stream, hunting when weather permitted, and working on repairs to tools and equipment. Meredith quickly proved her worth, turning the Spartan Longhouse into something more resembling a home. Her daughter Edith, once recovered from her brush with death, revealed herself to be a curious, chattering child who followed Cormac like a shadow whenever he was inside, peppering him with questions he struggled to understand and answer in her language. The baby, Alfric, began to thrive under proper care and feeding. Only Edwin maintained his distance, watching the Viking with unwavering suspicion. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, Meredith sat by the fire weaving while her younger children slept. Cormac was carving a small wooden figure, a horse for Edith, who had expressed delight at his animals. The boy still fears me, Cormac observed, breaking the comfortable silence. Meredith's hands stilled on her work. Edwin was 6 when your people came to our first village. He saw things no child should see. Cormac nodded grimly. War is ugly. Was it war? She challenged quietly. Attacking farmers and craftsmen who had never raised a sword? He met her gaze steadily. Your people invaded our ancestors' lands generations ago. The wheel turns. And that justifies everything? Her voice remained low, mindful of the sleeping children, but her eyes flashed. I do not seek justification, Cormac replied. I follow my Jarl, as my father followed his. I fight when called to fight. Have you killed many Saxons? The question was direct, unflinching. Cormac looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of wielding sword and axe. Yes. Women? Children? No, he said firmly. Never. There is no honor in such killing. Meredith studied him, searching for truth in his face. Yet you did nothing to stop others who did. The accusation hung in the air between them, impossible to deny. Cormac had indeed witnessed atrocities during raids that he had neither participated in nor prevented. I cannot change what was done, he said finally. But while you are under my roof, no harm will come to you or your children. This I swear by Thor's hammer. He touched the amulet at his neck. Your god of thunder means nothing to me, Meredith said. Then I swear by whatever you hold sacred. I believe in Christ, she said. Do you mock my faith as your people often do? I do not mock what I do not understand, Cormac replied honestly. Your white Christ, he died without fighting back. This makes no sense to me. But if his teachings make you strong enough to survive what you have survived, then perhaps there is power in him after all. It was the most thoughtful response Meredith had ever heard from a Northman regarding her faith, and it clearly surprised her. She resumed her weaving, but the tension between them had shifted subtly. Tomorrow is the Christ Mass, she said after a while. A holy day for my people. Cormac nodded. And for me, it is Yule, the midwinter festival. Do you celebrate it alone out here? Usually I go to the settlement for the feast. But this year, he glanced at her and the children. It would not be safe for you there. The implications were clear. He would forego his traditional celebrations to protect them. Meredith's expression softened slightly. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could each observe our customs here. Together. It was a small offering, but significant, an acknowledgement that despite their differences, they could exist in the same space, respecting each other's ways. I would like that, Cormac said, and for the first time since she had arrived he smiled, a transformation that lightened his stern features and revealed a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior's exterior. Their shared midwinter celebration marked a turning point. Meredith prepared special bread and honey cakes, teaching her children the story of the Christ child born in humble circumstances. Cormac contributed a feast of roasted venison, and shared tales of Odin's wild hunt across the winter sky. Though their beliefs remained separate, the atmosphere in the Longhouse grew warmer than mere firelight could account for. As winter deepened, Cormac found himself increasingly drawn to Meredith's quiet strength and practical wisdom. She, in turn, discovered layers to the taciturn Northman that contradicted everything she had been taught to believe about his kind. He was capable of gentleness, evidenced by how carefully he carved toys for her children. He valued knowledge, often asking her to explain Saxon customs and words. And most surprisingly, he treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced, even from her own countrymen. Edwin's resistance began to thaw the day Cormac took him to check the fishing nets. When a hole in the ice sent the boy plunging into the freezing water, Cormac didn't hesitate to dive in after him, pulling him to safety at great personal risk. That night, as they both recovered by the fire wrapped in furs, the boy asked Cormac to teach him how to use a bow properly. Why? Cormac asked, surprised by the request. So I can help hunt, Edwin replied. To repay you. You owe me nothing. My mother says a man always pays his debts. Cormac studied the boy thoughtfully. Your mother is wise. But there are many ways to repay debts besides hunting. I want to learn, Edwin insisted. I need to protect them when... He stopped abruptly. When you leave here, Cormac finished for him. Edwin nodded, his young face solemn. Very well. When the weather permits, we will begin your lessons. As the days lengthened incrementally towards spring, life in the isolated Longhouse settled into comfortable familiarity. Edith now greeted Cormac each morning with a hug around his knees, chattering about her dreams. Baby Alfric had begun to crawl, exploring every corner of the Longhouse. Even Edwin had begun to relax his vigilance, eagerly absorbing Cormac's lessons in hunting, tracking, and basic weapon handling. Meredith watched this transformation with mixed emotions. The safety and relative comfort they had found with Cormac was undeniable, yet she couldn't forget that he was one of the invaders who had destroyed her people's way of life. More troubling still were her growing feelings for him, feelings that both frightened and exhilarated her. One night, after the children were asleep, she found Cormac outside the Longhouse, staring at the star-filled sky. The aurora danced above them, green and purple ribbons shimmering across the heavens. The bridge to Asgard, he said as she joined him, pulling her cloak tighter against the cold. Where warriors who died bravely go to feast with the gods. It's beautiful, she admitted. Though my faith teaches that heaven lies beyond the stars. Perhaps all our gods look down from the same place, only we see them differently. Cormac mused. Meredith glanced at him, surprised by the philosophical thought. That would scandalize both our priests. A smile tugged at his lips. Good thing neither of us has a priest nearby, then. Their laughter mingled in the cold air, forming misty clouds that dissipated into the night. Standing there beneath the cosmic light show, the differences between Saxon and Norse seemed suddenly arbitrary and small. Meredith, Cormac said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. When spring comes fully. She tensed, knowing what he was about to say. The arrangement had always been temporary, shelter through the worst of winter. Now, with the first hints of thaw appearing during the day, that time was drawing to a close. We will find somewhere to go, she said quickly. You've done more than enough. No, he interrupted. That's not what I meant to say. He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the starlight. I want you to stay. All of you. Meredith's breath caught. As your thralls? No. As? He struggled for the right word. As family. The declaration hung between them, momentous and fragile. Cormac, she began carefully. Your people and mine are just people, he finished. Different customs, different gods, but people all the same. These months have taught me that. It's not that simple, she protested. If we stayed, what would we be to you? The Saxon woman and her children you took in? Objects of pity and charity? You would be my wife, he said bluntly. If you would have me. The children would be as my own. Meredith stared at him, stunned by the proposal. Your people would never accept a Saxon as your wife. Some would not, he acknowledged. Others might. Things are changing in these lands. Norse men take Saxon wives. Saxon men serve Norse lords. The old hatreds are starting to fade, at least in some places. And if they don't fade? If your people turn against you for choosing a Saxon? If my children are mocked and abused for their heritage? Then we leave, Cormac said simply. I have skills that would be valued anywhere. We could go north to the Danelaw territories where such unions are more common. Or even across the sea to new settlements in the west. His certainty both moved and frightened her. You would leave everything you know? For us? For you, he corrected softly. For what we could be together. Meredith felt tears threatening and turned away, overwhelmed by his offer and her own conflicting emotions. I need time to think, she whispered. Of course, he said, though she could hear the tension in his voice. Take all the time you need. The following days brought an uncomfortable awareness between them. Cormac gave Meredith the space she requested, focusing on teaching Edwin and maintaining the homestead. Meredith, for her part, found herself watching Cormac when he wasn't looking, the way he patiently showed Edwin how to hold a bough, how he gently soothed Alfric when the baby was fussy, the care with which he repaired Edith's favorite wooden doll when it broke. Gradually, she began to see beyond the labels of Norse and invader to the man himself, honorable, steady, kind beneath his warrior's exterior. A man who offered protection without demanding submission, who respected her autonomy in a world where women were often treated as property. But could she truly build a life with someone from the people who had destroyed her old one? Could she set aside the memories of burning villages and slaughtered countrymen? And even if she could, would such a union bring danger to her children rather than safety? These questions consumed her as winter reluctantly gave way to early spring. Then fate intervened to force her decision. Cormac had gone to check his traps in the nearby forest, taking Edwin with him as had become their custom. Meredith was outside the Longhouse with Edith, teaching her how to identify the first spring plants pushing through the melting snow, when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. 3 mounted warriors appeared over the rise, their Norse origin unmistakable from their dress and weapons. Meredith quickly gathered Edith into her arms and retreated toward the Longhouse where baby Alfric was sleeping. Woman! The lead rider called in accented Saxon as he approached. Is this the dwelling of Cormac Quelling? Meredith hesitated at the threshold, one hand on the door. It is, she answered cautiously. He is not here. The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly surprised to find a Saxon woman at the home of a Norse warrior. The leader dismounted, handing his reins to one of his companions. "I am Gorm Haraldson," he announced. "Shield brother to Cormac. We fought together in the southern campaigns." Meredith nodded warily but didn't invite him inside. Edith clung to her skirts, eyes wide with fear at the sight of the armed strangers. "When will he return?" Gorm asked, his gaze shifting between Meredith and the child. "I cannot say," she replied. "He went hunting." Gorm's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to him? His thrall?" Before Meredith could answer, the second warrior spoke in Norse, clearly not realizing she understood some of their language after months with Cormac. "Looks like Cormac has taken himself a Saxon bewarmer," he said with a crude laugh. "And bred her too, by the looks of it. The child is fair-haired," the third man observed in the same tongue. "Could be his get." Gorm silenced them with a gesture, then addressed Meredith again. "Tell Cormac that Jarl Sigurd summons him to council. Raiders have been seen along the coast. All warriors are called to defend the settlement." "I will tell him," Meredith promised, eager for them to leave. Gorm nodded, but instead of returning to his horse, he took a step closer. "How long has he kept you here, Saxon?" "He doesn't keep me," Meredith said, lifting her chin. "I stay of my own choice." A skeptical smile crossed Gorm's face. "Of course. And I suppose the children are also here by choice?" "They are my children from my Saxon husband, now dead," she clarified, hoping to dispel their earlier speculation. "Cormac saved us from the winter storms when we had nowhere to go." "How charitable of him," Gorm remarked, exchanging meaningful glances with his companions. "Cormac was never known for his soft heart in the raids. Perhaps he's changed. Or perhaps he's merely found uses for them that require keeping them alive," the second warrior suggested in Norse, not bothering to lower his voice. Meredith felt her face flush with anger but held her tongue. Antagonizing these men would only create problems for Cormac, and potentially danger for her children. "I will deliver your message," she said firmly, pulling Edith closer to her side. "Now if you'll excuse me, my baby is inside." Gorm studied her for a moment longer, then nodded curtly and returned to his horse. "Tell him we expect him at the settlement by tomorrow's sunset," he called as they prepared to ride away. "And woman," he paused, fixing her with a hard stare, "be careful. Not all of our people are as accommodating as Cormac seems to be." The warning, or was it a threat, lingered in the air as the three warriors rode away. Meredith hurried inside, checking on Alfric, who still slept peacefully, unaware of the potential danger that had just passed. By the time Cormac returned with Edwin and 2 hares for the cooking pot, Meredith had worked herself into a state of anxiety. She related the visitor's message while Cormac listened stone-faced. "You understand what this means," she said when she had finished. "You must go." "Yes," he agreed grimly. "If raiders threaten the settlement, I am oath-bound to defend it. And we cannot stay here alone," Meredith continued. "Those men, the way they looked at us—" "They would not harm you," Cormac insisted. "Gorm is many things, but he respects the boundaries of another warrior's household." "For how long?" Meredith challenged. "Once you're gone, what's to stop them or others from returning? A Saxon woman and her children, alone in a Norse homestead? We would be easy prey." Cormac's jaw tightened as he recognized the truth in her words. "Then you will come with me to the settlement." "As what? Your thralls? Your captives? You've heard what they assumed about me, about us." "As my family," Cormac said firmly. "The time for hiding is over, Meredith. If we are to have any future together, it must begin with truth before my people." Meredith sank onto a bench, suddenly overwhelmed. "What if they reject us? What if they demand you give us up?" Cormac knelt before her, taking her hands in his much larger ones. "Then we leave. Together. But first we must try." His eyes searched hers. "Unless you do not wish to be with me?" The vulnerability in his question pierced straight to Meredith's heart. Despite all her doubts and fears, one truth had become increasingly clear through the winter months. she had grown to love this man who defied everything she had believed about his kind. "I do wish it," she admitted softly. "But I fear for my children." "Our children," he corrected gently. "If you will have me as their father." Tears filled Meredith's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Cormac's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch surprisingly tender for such a battle-hardened warrior. "Then it is decided," he said. "We go to the settlement together. As a family." The journey to the Norse settlement of Jorvik took most of the following day. Cormac had loaded their few possessions onto a small cart pulled by his sturdy pony. Meredith rode on the cart with baby Alfric and Edith, while Edwin proudly walked alongside Cormac, carrying the small bow the Norse warrior had crafted for him. As they approached the settlement, Meredith felt her anxiety rising. The wooden palisade surrounding the town loomed ahead, marked with the carved heads of dragons and other mythical beasts. Guards at the gate eyed them with curiosity as they approached, particularly the Saxon woman and children accompanying one of their warriors. "Cormac Quelling," he announced himself to the guards. "Here at Jarl Sigurd's summons." The guards nodded him through, but their eyes lingered on Meredith and the children with undisguised curiosity and some suspicion. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the busy streets, and Meredith felt the weight of stares as they made their way toward the center of the settlement. Jorvik was a shock to Meredith's senses after months of isolation at the remote Longhouse. The noise, the smells, the press of people, both Norse and Saxon, was overwhelming. The settlement had clearly prospered under Norse rule, with busy workshops and trading stalls lining the muddy streets. Saxon craftsmen worked alongside Norse merchants, an uneasy coexistence born of pragmatism rather than brotherhood. They had barely reached the central marketplace when a voice called out, "Cormac! By Thor's hammer, the rumors were true!" Gorm strode toward them, accompanied by several other warriors. His eyes raked over Meredith and the children with unconcealed interest. "So you've brought your household," he remarked, switching to Norse, presumably to exclude Meredith from the conversation. "Bold choice, brother. They are under my protection," Cormac replied in the same language, his tone making it clear the matter was not open for discussion. "Where is the Jarl?" "In the Great Hall, preparing for tonight's council," Gorm answered, still studying Meredith. "But I wouldn't bring them there if I were you. Some of the older warriors, well, they haven't forgotten that we came here to conquer, not to play house with Saxon women." Cormac's expression hardened. "Meredith is to be my wife. The children will be mine by law. Any man who has a problem with that can speak to me directly." A ripple of surprise went through the gathered warriors. Gorm's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? Not concubine or bedthrall? Cormac, have you lost your mind? The Jarl will never approve." "I don't require his approval for who I marry," Cormac cut him off. "Only his blessing, which I will seek as a courtesy." Gorm shook his head in disbelief, then switched to Saxon, addressing Meredith directly. "Woman, do you understand what you're getting into? Many here will never accept you or your children. You'll be seen as the enemy in their midst." Meredith lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I understand hatred well enough. I've seen it from both sides now. But I've also seen that it can be overcome, one heart at a time." Her dignified response seemed to surprise Gorm, who studied her with new interest. "You speak better Norse than you let on yesterday," he observed. "I've been learning," she replied simply. Gorm turned back to Cormac. "She has spirit, I'll grant you that. But spirit alone won't protect her or those children when you're away fighting." "Then I'll find another way to serve," Cormac said. "I've spilled enough blood for 3 lifetimes." This declaration seemed to shock the gathered warriors even more than his announcement about marrying Meredith. A Norse warrior who no longer wished to fight. It was almost unthinkable. "The Jarl is waiting," Cormac said, ending the conversation. "Where can my family rest safely until I return?" After a moment's hesitation, Gorm sighed. "My sister Inga runs a brewing house near the eastern gate. Her husband was killed last summer, so she has space. She's more accepting of Saxons than most." She trades with them for grain. Thank you, Cormac said, genuine gratitude in his voice. As they made their way to the brewery, Meredith leaned close to Cormac. Will the Jarl truly try to prevent our marriage? He can disapprove, but he cannot forbid it, Cormac assured her. However, his attitude will influence how others treat you. If he accepts you, many will follow his lead. And if he doesn't? Cormac's expression was grim. Then we will face difficulties here. But remember what I promised, if this place becomes untenable, we leave. Together. Inga proved to be a tall, broad-shouldered woman with the same direct gaze as her brother, but tempered with a practicality that came from running a successful business. She assessed Meredith and the children quickly, then nodded. Any woman who can tame Cormac Quelling must be extraordinary, she declared. You and the little ones can stay here while he meets with the Jarl. I'll keep the curious and the hostile at bay. Meredith thanked her, relieved to find an unexpected ally. As Cormac prepared to leave for the Great Hall, he took Meredith aside. No matter what happens with the Jarl, know this, he said, taking her hands in his. My heart is yours. My loyalty is to you and the children above all others. We will find our way through this. Meredith squeezed his hands. Be careful. Your words about not wanting to fight anymore, they did not sit well with your shield brothers. They will have to accept that I've changed, he said simply. As have many things. With that, he bent and kissed her, their first public display of affection, before striding away toward the great hall where Jarl Sigurd awaited. The hours of Cormac's absence stretched endlessly for Meredith. Inga proved a gracious hostess, keeping the children entertained and protecting them from the curious stares of customers who came to buy her renowned ale. Edwin, initially wary of this new Norse woman, gradually warmed to her when she showed him how the brewing process worked. Edith was delighted by Inga's cat, a sleek mouser that patrolled the brewing house. Only baby Alfric remained fussy, sensing his mother's anxiety. Your oldest boy has Norse blood in him, Inga observed as they shared a simple meal that evening. The way he holds himself, his coloring. Meredith nearly choked on her bread. What? No, that's impossible. His father was Saxon through and through. Inga shrugged. Perhaps further back then. Many Saxon families have Norse ancestors now, whether they acknowledge it or not. Just as many Norse have Saxon blood. She smiled wryly. The men may fight, but they've never been able to resist each other's women. The observation, while crudely put, contained a profound truth that Meredith had never considered. The boundaries between their peoples were already blurring, regardless of political divisions. Will the Jarl accept us? Meredith asked, changing the subject. Inga considered the question carefully. Sigurd is shrewd. He cares more for stability and prosperity than for old hatreds. If he believes your union with Cormac serves the greater peace, he may support it. She paused. But there are others, powerful warriors and landholders, who resist any integration with Saxons beyond what's necessary for trade and labor. They will oppose you. And what do you think? Meredith asked directly. Inga smiled. I think any woman who can put that look in Cormac Quelling's eyes, like he's found his way home after a lifetime of wandering, deserves a chance at happiness, regardless of where she was born. Before Meredith could respond, the door to the brewing house burst open. Cormac stood framed in the entrance, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the room. Meredith rose to her feet, heart pounding. The children, sensing the tension, gathered close to her. Inga quietly moved to stand beside them, a subtle gesture of solidarity. The Jarl has spoken, Cormac announced, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Meredith held her breath, searching his face for clues. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features, transforming him in a way she had rarely seen. He will not oppose our union, Cormac said. More than that, he offers us land, a farmstead on the outskirts of the settlement, with good soil and access to the river. Relief flooded through Meredith. Truly? But why? Because he is wise enough to see that the future lies in peace between our peoples, not endless conflict, Cormac explained. He believes unions like ours are the path to that peace. There must be conditions, Inga said shrewdly. Cormac nodded. 2. First, I must still answer his call if raiders threaten our lands. My oath as a warrior remains, though he accepts that I wish to farm rather than fight. And the second? Meredith prompted. Our marriage must be public, witnessed by both Norse and Saxon leaders. He wants it to serve as an example, to show that such unions have his blessing. Meredith's mind raced with the implications. A public ceremony would place them squarely in the view of those who might oppose their union. Yet it would also grant them protection. The Jarl's formal approval would make it more difficult for anyone to harm them without consequences. When? She asked. 3 days hence, Cormac replied. At the spring festival. Both our peoples celebrate the return of growing things. The Jarl thinks it a fitting time for new beginnings. Edwin, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. Does this mean you'll be our father now? He asked Cormac directly, his young face solemn. Cormac knelt to meet the boy's eyes. If you will have me, yes. I cannot replace the father you lost, but I would be honored to help raise you to be a strong, honorable man. Edwin considered this with the seriousness of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. Will you teach me to protect my mother and my sister and brother? I will, Cormac promised. And much more besides. The boy nodded decisively. Then I agree. Laughter broke the tension in the room, Meredith and Inga both amused by the solemnity with which Edwin had granted his approval. Even Edith giggled, though she likely didn't understand the full significance of what was happening. That night, as the children slept in the small chamber Inga had provided, Meredith and Cormac sat by the hearth, speaking in low voices about their future. Not everyone at the council was pleased with the Jarl's decision, Cormac admitted. There were those who spoke against it bitterly. Will they cause trouble? Meredith asked. Perhaps. But most will accept the Jarl's word, even if they disagree. He took her hand. Are you certain about this path, Meredith? It will not be easy. She looked into the fire, considering her answer carefully. When I lost my husband, I thought my life was over. When we lost our home to raiders, I was certain we would die. Every step of our journey has been shaped by the conflict between our peoples. She turned to face him. But then I found you, or you found us, and for the first time, I began to hope for something more than mere survival. What do you hope for now? He asked softly. Peace, she said simply. A home where my children can grow strong and happy. A life where love matters more than old hatreds. She squeezed his hand. If building that life means facing opposition, then so be it. We've both survived worse. The 3 days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word spread quickly through the settlement about the upcoming union between the Saxon widow and the Norse warrior. Reactions were mixed, curiosity, disapproval, and occasionally support. Inga proved invaluable, introducing Meredith to other Norse women who had formed relationships with Saxons, either through marriage or business partnerships. There were more than Meredith had expected, and their advice about navigating the cultural differences gave her courage. On the morning of the ceremony, as Inga helped her dress in a simple but elegant blue gown, a gift from the Jarl's wife, Meredith felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Cormac by her side. The wedding took place in the open area before the Great Hall, with members of both communities in attendance. Jarl Sigurd himself presided, his imposing presence lending weight to the proceedings. The ceremony incorporated elements of both traditions, the exchange of swords and rings from Norse custom, prayers to both the old gods and the Christian God. When Cormac spoke his vows in carefully practiced Saxon, and Meredith responded in newly learned Norse, a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Even those who had come expecting to disapprove found themselves moved by the evident sincerity of the couple. The celebrations that followed lasted well into the night, with feasting, music, and dancing that gradually broke down the barriers between the two communities. By the time the newlyweds departed for their new homestead, a sturdy farmhouse with good land that the Jarl had granted them, many who had been skeptical were offering good wishes. Not all were won over, of course. Meredith noticed a group of hard-faced warriors who watched the proceedings with barely concealed disgust. And there were Saxons too who muttered about betrayal when they thought she couldn't hear. But these voices were, for now at least, overshadowed by those who saw in their union a hope for a different future. As spring gave way to summer, and summer to autumn, the Quelling family settled into their new life. The farmstead thrived under their combined efforts, Cormac's strength and knowledge of the land complemented by Meredith's skill with animals and crops. Edwin grew taller and more confident, proudly helping with the heavier work while still finding time for the childhood play he had been denied for too long. Edith became the darling of their nearest neighbors, her natural charm transcending cultural differences. Baby Alfric took his first steps in the rich soil of their new home. There were challenges, of course. Whispers and occasional hostility when they visited the settlement for trading. A few threatening incidents that required Cormac to demonstrate that though he preferred peace, he had not forgotten how to fight. The difficult process of blending their different traditions and beliefs into something that honored both without diminishing either. But there were unexpected joys too. The discovery that music and storytelling crossed all cultural boundaries, leading to evenings where Norse and Saxon neighbors gathered to share tales and songs. The gradual acceptance they found in both communities as their successful farm became a model for cooperation. The day Edwin stood proudly between two friends, one Norse, one Saxon, united in their boyish adventures rather than divided by their heritage. And most precious of all, the quiet moments when Meredith would catch Cormac watching their family with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. In those moments she knew that whatever hardships they had endured, whatever obstacles still lay ahead, they had found something rare and valuable, a love that transcended the ancient hatreds of their peoples, a foundation for a future where their children might know peace. On the first anniversary of their meeting, that stormy winter night when Meredith and her children had collapsed on Cormac's threshold, they stood together outside their farmhouse, watching the northern lights dance across the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Meredith asked softly. "Taking in a half-frozen Saxon woman and her children that night?" Cormac's arm tightened around her waist. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said. "We lost too many years to hatred and separation. But we found each other in the end," she reminded him. "And perhaps that's the greater miracle, that after all the bloodshed between our peoples, love could still grow." Above them, the lights shimmered like a bridge between worlds, Norse and Saxon, past and future, division and unity, illuminating a path forward that neither could have imagined alone, but both now walked together,